As the story of the Cyprus template for world financial reorganization unfolds, it has now become totally clear that the British Empire's policy is your money and your life. Now, what's going on in the case of the recent developments is that the Great Cyprus bank heist, where the entire banking sector of Cyprus has in fact been frozen, there is 100% freeze on liquidity. This is not something that was done by the European Union, by the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the well-known and well-despised Troika, as a response to the crisis in Cyprus. That's nonsense. This was something that was long planned, and it actually goes back minimally to a December 2012 planning document jointly issued by the Bank of England and the FDIC of the United States, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, working with input of the Federal Reserve System of the United States. And in fact, it goes back, according to the best evidence that we have in hand so far, to planning documents 6 months earlier than that, issued by the European Union. That's as far back as we have at this point of the black and white, checks in hand, stubs evidence of the planning that is going on for global seizure of your money and your life by the British Empire to try to salvage their completely bankrupt and unsalvageable financial system. There is legislation that is planned. It is stated by the European Union. There are documents being presented to the European Parliament and to the nations involved, and there is also legislation in the United States and further legislation planned, including the notorious and infamous Dodd-Frank bill, which is designed to bring about this great global bank heist. Now, all of the specific facts aside for the moment, and we will go through some of these facts, it was clearly evident, going back quite some time, that this was in fact the intention of the British Empire, even before they themselves had stated that it was their intention. The fact of the matter is that, as Lyndon LaRouche has repeatedly noted, it is intention that is the causal guiding force, not only in human history and in the economy, but in the physical universe as well. And this is a lesson, a deeper, more profound lesson to be learned by the current scandal underway. Now, in response to the latest developments, yesterday, March 31st, I'm speaking to you today on April 1st, Lyndon LaRouche commented that what is now going on involves a crime so great that people responsible, in particular, your congressmen, your senators, will be held accountable. Lyndon LaRouche said, and I quote, "The enactment of such a provision now would be, in effect, an act of treason against the United States because it means the destruction of the United States. And the members of the Senate or other bodies which go for this are guilty in terms of intention of treason, of a treasonous action. Not to support Glass-Steagall is already tantamount to treason, because only the Glass-Steagall Act would save the United States from collapse. We don't need to save any of the big banks. They go down. They go down. We save the nation." Close quote. Now, here is what is underway at this point to give you the battlefield as of this moment. In the situation in Cyprus, in the course of last week, the authorities of the European Union and the Cypriot government announced what they would be doing with the largest banks, including the Bank of Cyprus, under the bailout regimen that has been implemented, or what they're calling the bail-in mechanism. 37.5% of all deposits in the Cypriot banking system above 100,000 euros, which they claim are going to be protected for the savers, and we'll get to that. Anything above that, 37.5%, will be forcibly converted into common stock in the Bank of Cyprus. In other words, 37.5% of what you thought you owed, over 100,000, congratulations, you now are a part owner of a completely bankrupt, insolvent bank. No choices, it's yours. Of the remainder, 22.5% of your deposits you will never see again, and you will not receive any interest on it either. 40% you will also never see, unless, of course, the bank does wonderfully well, which has zero chance of occurring, and you supposedly will accrue interest on that 40%. Now, there's only one problem here, which is that all of this supposed money, both the interest accrued and what you're possibly going to get later, is completely frozen and locked up in the Cypriot banking system. You can't get it. You can only get 300 euros a day, which may sound like a lot if the economy were simply people going out to buy lunch or something like that, or go to the gas station. But businesses cannot function. And what is in fact going on right now in Cyprus, since banks do not cash checks, they will not take credit cards, everything is frozen to steal the money to bail out the transatlantic banking system. There's no longer a monetary system of any significance whatsoever in Cyprus. Restaurants are functioning on a cash basis. They have to pay their providers on a cash basis. Checks don't work, credit cards don't work, ATMs don't work. Your money is worthless. It was worthless before, in point of fact, but now it is completely unavailable. And the economy is beginning to grind to a halt. How many days or weeks this will last is anybody's guess. But you already have shortages of everything. The ports in Cyprus are not functioning. The restaurants are closing down. Businesses are closing down. People are not able to eat. The food lines are growing in many of the cities in Cyprus. And there is growing panic in the population, a cross between panic and resignation and despair. Now that's just Cyprus. But the exact same thing, the exact same policy, this Cyprus template, which we've been discussing on this website, is in fact already underway actively in Spain, in the case where bank stockholders or depositors in Spanish banks were sold, they were swindled into buying preferred stocks in those same banks, which now have gone bankrupt, like the famous case of Bankia Bank. So you are now the owner, the proud owner, just like in Cyprus, where it was done involuntarily, except in Spain they swindled you to do it. And you now own stock which is worth 0.1% of what it was worth a few weeks ago. Now, just parenthetically, and this will be something for further elaboration in upcoming videos on this website, that is exactly what was done in the United States by First National City Bank in the early 1930s, and which was the subject, among other things, of the famous Pecora Commission under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which at the time led to the Glass-Steagall Law. And it has to again today. It's the same crimes, it's the same cast of characters, it's the same requirement, and this time it has to end as it did under Roosevelt with Glass-Steagall, a return to Glass-Steagall. But it's not just Cyprus and Spain. This is the active policy, for example, throughout the European Union. It was stated by Jeroen Dijsselbloem, who is the new president of the Eurogroup, on March 25th, where he said, Cyprus is the template, and thus the title of the series of videos which you're now watching. 3 days later, on March 28th, just to make it clear that this was no false statement by Dijsselbloem, he may have been a little excessively frank and upfront about what their policy was, but this is the policy. March 28th, a member of the Governing Council of the European Central Bank, Klaas Knot, said, this approach of swiping deposits will be part of the European liquidation policy, close quote. 1 day after that, a Swiss member of the European Parliament, Gunnar Hökmark, on March 29th, said, you need to be able to do the bail-in as well with deposits. And he announced that there are, in fact, specific legislation, bills being presented and prepared for the European Parliament. And also, perhaps most explicit of all, was on March 26th, at a press conference, no off-the-cuff remarks, a press conference given by Chantal Hughes, who is the spokeswoman of Michel Barnier, who is the European Commissioner in charge of financial regulation. What she said was, at no point is it possible to bail in depositors under 100,000 euros. Oh, heavens, no, that just happened in Cyprus, but it won't happen anywhere else, either now or in the future, she said. But in the Commission's proposal, which is under discussion, it is not excluded that deposits over 100,000 euros could be instruments eligible for bail-in. It is a possibility. There are also reports that we have from Canada of the Economic Action Plan of 2013, also laying out the same policy, which is you swipe people's deposits to try to bail out the bankrupt banks, and so on and so forth. So what you're dealing with here, take a step back. Let's look at the entire world. What you're talking about is an interconnected chain, a financial chain, which has two weak links. The first weak link, as we're seeing clearly, is the case of Cyprus. That's one of the weak links. A second weak link of this entire chain is what's marked in red, the entire transatlantic financial system. The entire thing is gone. And don't assume for a second that just because they're not marked in bright red that somehow South America or Africa or even Asia will fare well under these circumstances. The entire thing is coming down. Now, since we've taken a global view of this and we've stepped back, let's do so conceptually as well. Lyndon LaRouche foresaw that exactly this was the British plan. That, as they have stated, they can no longer run another bailout like they did in 2008 by fleecing taxpayers directly. They have to go about it by fleecing the taxpayers indirectly, by stealing unsecured creditor accounts, meaning depositors. And LaRouche foresaw exactly this, knowing none of the details which I've presented to you so far, and none of the ones that I'm going to present momentarily as well. Because what he saw was the actual intention of where the British Empire was heading. And what he said in what is now a historic February 15th, 2013 webcast, he pointed to exactly this development. And he said, the vast mass of debt, which is represented by the monetarist operation, would be canceled. And in its place, they would have a new system of finances which ignores entirely all the obligations associated with the old, which would mean that most of the people of the world would be starving to death quickly. I know exactly what they're doing because I know how systems work. This is the greatest population reduction scheme so far in known history. And that's what the policy of the people who oppose Glass-Steagall is, whether they themselves know it or not. But they will be held accountable for the effect of that policy. Close quote. In other words, what LaRouche was operating on, and what you need to operate on if you want to understand the nature of the enemy and where the world is going, instead of gossip in media accounts, is you have to know the intention. And often it's the intention which is unknown to the actors in the drama itself. The universe as a whole, physically, as well as history and economy, is guided by intention, by an overriding causal direction of where things are heading. In the case of the economy, to even survive, the British Empire had to do what they are now doing and what LaRouche said they knew they would do. And LaRouche was very, very clear about this whole thing. So the question of intentionality, not the simple facts and evidence and sense certainty which presents to us on a daily basis, is actually the governing causality. It is that standpoint of LaRouche's, and only that standpoint, which can allow accurate forecasting, as LaRouche has engaged in repeatedly. So that's what we're looking at today. Now, the evidence is now in our hands to prove that LaRouche was absolutely correct. For example, we have revisited and taken a look at an earlier document published December 10th, 2012, jointly written by the Bank of England and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation of the United States. It is a document which has a very unlikely title. It is called Resolving Globally Active, Systemically Important Financial Institutions, which for the cognoscenti are called G-SIFIs. And if you didn't know what a G-SIFI was before, you better learn quickly. G-SIFIs. What this document says, for the purposes of our discussion, there are 4 points that are worth underlining, all hung together under the ruse that, oh, we can't bail this out again with taxpayer money, but under the guiding line that we have to bail it out. The cancer must be kept intact. And to do that, they make 4 points. First of all, they say that what they call unsecured creditors are fair game. Now, unsecured creditors can mean various things. It can mean, in fact, depositors above a certain amount that is so-called guaranteed either by the FDIC in the United States or guaranteed by the EU and Europe. Now, that guarantee has just been ripped up into little pieces of confetti in the case of Cyprus, so I wouldn't rely on that particularly. But the argument about unsecured creditors is that what you can do now is you can just lift, steal, rob, seize the unsecured creditors, i.e. deposits in these financial institutions, for the purpose of bailing them out. Now, this is completely unheard of. Let's be clear. Under current standing regulations, which have just been destroyed, supposedly what happens is that the assured amount in the United States by the FDIC, $250,000, is protected in the case of a bank going bankrupt and being rolled up, going out of business. And the FDIC takes care of you to that level. If you have more than that, sorry sir, sorry ma'am, you just lost it. However, what's being proposed here is that you're going to lose that, not to put the bank out of business, but to keep the bank in business, to keep the cancer operational. It's absolutely scandalous. And the size of the cancer, the size of the bubble that they plan to keep intact with your money, if you have any, is enormous. You're talking about quadrillions of dollars. Now that's why it is both your life and your money that they're talking about seizing. And they're absolutely not just intent on doing it, they're doing it. It's happening now. It's happening in Cyprus, it's happening in Spain, it's happening across the EU, it's going to happen in Canada, it's going to happen in the United States. Like they say, this one is coming to a bank near you. Now, so they want to take the unsecured creditors, number one. Number two, they are talking about using this process to transform the cancer, the speculative bubble, into a leaner, meaner banking system. Exactly what LaRouche was describing. And to this end, they are using and employing the arguments of the idea of too big to fail, of ring fencing, and of the Dodd-Frank bill. In other words, too big to fail. I mean, first of all, the whole idea of too big to fail is nonsense. What do you mean too big to fail? They have failed. They're gone. To argue that they're too big to fail simply is to argue, well, we have to bail them out. And if you say, well, we've got to get rid of banks that are too big to fail by splitting them up, you're talking about saying, well, let's take this metastasized cancer and divide it up into different portions and place the different portions in the body. That's the too big to fail argument. And the point of too big to fail, the problem is not the size of banks or bank deposits. The problem is the function. And if the function is to feed the cancer, it's all got to go. And if the function is not to feed the cancer, as under Glass-Steagall, we salvage it. But what's happening with too big to fail is that this is now the basis, and it is stated in this document, to push through their fascist banking reorganization. Same thing with ring fencing, and they're quite explicit about this thing. This is from the Bank of England FDIC document. Quote, the resulting new private sector operations would be smaller, more manageable, and perhaps more profitable. Ring fencing of a banking group's retail banking activities from the group's investment banking activities would prove particularly valuable in facilitating such a restructuring. So it's not just that too big to fail, ring fencing, the Lekanen Group, electrified ring fencing, Dodd-Frank, all of these things are distractions from Glass-Steagall. They are actually part of the enemy's plan. And anybody who is using that as an excuse to not back Glass-Steagall, as LaRouche said, is committing treason, because the effect of this, as is clear under this document and as LaRouche foresaw, is that the world's population is going to lose not just their money, but their life. This is a case of your money and your life. That's the second point. The third point of this document. They announce that the joint coordination between the United Kingdom and the United States will best go ahead only after the point where the British banking system is reorganized under a new regulatory authority, which will now incorporate all of the non-deposit taking financial institutions. That means the Goldman Sachses of the financial universe. It's the investment banks, the insurers, it's everybody especially involved in the derivative side. So before that is under this regulatory scheme, the British side of this was not really guaranteed or assured from their standpoint. But they inform the reader, happily, that under those new regulations, which had been approved in Britain, this would go into effect. When? Today, April 1st, 2013. And this is no April Fool's joke. They are now operational to be able to do this. All systems are go. And this is what they're planning to proceed with. Fourth and final point, they announced that they have and will have by the end of this year a detailed plan, bank by bank, of the G-SIFIs, which are the banks that they're going to save. Let the other ones go to hell. But the G-SIFIs will be bailed out, and they will have them identified bank by bank with the exact mechanism for each case by the end of this year. Now, all of this was knowable. And in fact, it was all known without knowing any of the details or any of the predicates, only some of which I've presented to you right now. And that is the case if you think like LaRouche, if you understand what the actual causal relationships are in the physical universe and in the political universe, and are not distracted by sense perception and this nonsense idea that somehow truth is based on that which you perceive. Truth is not based on what you perceive. Truth is based on understanding the underlying universal physical principles that are operating, often with the absolute ignorance of the participants in this. But the problem here with the Senate of the United States and with the Congress of the United States is not principally ignorance. Not that they're not ignorant. They are. But the problem is cowardice. The problem is refusing to see what's directly in front of their eyes because they don't like the implications of acting on that. So we have this national problem of cowardly and therefore blind, willfully blind senators and congressmen and so forth, which LaRouche has made it very clear will be held accountable and must be pressured into adopting Glass-Steagall immediately, because there is no other alternative than this type of worldwide thievery and robbery.
This action is actually, in fact, treason against the United States, because it means the destruction of the United States. The enactment of such a provision now would be, in effect, an act of treason against the United States. Not to support Glass-Steagall is already tantamount to treason, because only the Glass-Steagall Act would save the United States from collapse. We don't need to save any of the big banks. They go down, they go down. We save the nation.